I want us to now watch an interview that was done earlier on Spice FM with Dr. Kizza Besigye, the veteran Ugandan politician. Let's take a look at that interview.
Besigye, good morning and welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning. Sorry, it's a great pleasure to be here in Nairobi. And yeah, good morning to all the Spice FM listeners, wherever you are joining us from.
Karibu sana. That proverb from Mali, when you hear it, what's your interpretation of it? A canoe does not know a leader. When it capsizes, everyone gets wet.
Yes, it's the other way of saying we are in the same boat. So if the boat is leaking, you can't say I'm in the drier part because
we are all together in this.
Because if it sinks, you all go down.
So what is it? What were the Malians trying to say? That we should
look after each other. You know, take each other's interest into account. You know, we all have the same aspirations, same objectives, and be fair. Be fair to each other. I think that's what it must have.
Indeed. You're one of the leaders of Uganda, and also by extension, because of your seniority in politics, and all one of the leaders in East Africa. Now let's start with the politics of Uganda, and then we come to the region. So far, you've participated in elections before, you've participated in campaigning and championing for deeper entrenchment of democracy, better openness and participation of all this in your country. Today, as we speak, Dr. Besigye, would you say that Uganda has experienced better growth in democracy, in inclusivity, in becoming a more open society?
Quite the opposite, actually, and regrettably. Because you see, and it's sad for not just Uganda, but for, I think, the greater part of Africa, that, you know, with all the kinds of endowments that God, you know, gave us, we still grapple with the levels of suffering of the population that we experience, not just in Uganda, but in the whole region. We were at the same level of development with countries like South Korea, you know, at the time of independence. They are now in a totally different world from us. And this is simply because of the type of political direction, the political management that our countries have faced. Now, in Uganda, we were celebrating 60 years of independence last month. And in all these 60 years, no leader has ever handed over power to another. Every leader has been bombed out of office. No leader has ever, you know, left peacefully. Similarly, of course, whoever has occupied the highest office in Uganda has bombed his way into office. Which precisely means that the people of Uganda do not have the capacity to raise one of them to leadership or to say, stop here. Get out and we put in another one. In other words, the population is irrelevant in terms of managing their own affairs. They have no voice. And you know, so if you cannot influence what goes on in your country, if you cannot determine priorities, then you obviously get into the kinds of troubles that we have got. And of course, in order to silence the voices of all these people who, you know, want the best, obviously, like the rest of the people in the world, and try to agitate for changes in their country, then you deal with human rights abuses. And I'm sure you know that Uganda has had one of the poorest record in terms of human rights abuses. That's why, in fact, some of us, I did not start off to become a politician myself. I was a medical worker. I trained as a medical doctor. And that's what I had interest in doing in my life. That was very rudely interrupted following the 1980 election, simply because I was not in the politics, but I just supported a new party that had just formed, which was led by now President Museveni. And of course, that election did not end well of 1980, because the military commission, which was in charge of the country at the time, overthrew the electoral process. Just as the results were coming in, the electoral commission was sacked, and all the power of the commission reverted to the chair of the military commission, who then announced whatever he wanted. And that is what prompted Museveni, who had been a candidate, to start a bush war.
Yeah.
Now, those of us like me who did not know anything about the bush war and whatever they were planning, I was arrested, tortured very badly. Many people I found in prison whom I didn't know also, or that had been arrested, have never been seen again, you know. And that's how I fled and came into Kenya. In 1981, I was in Nairobi here working at the Aga Khan, at the Kenyatta National Hospital. But, you know, annoyed that I could have died for absolutely no reason. You know?
Nothing that you had actually done.
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
But looking back in let's talk about the last 30 years or so.
Yes.
I want to ask the question then systematically. Number one, Uganda has a constitution.
Yes.
Is Uganda a constitutional democracy?
Absolutely not. Because a constitutional democracy is not having a constitution, but having a constitutionalism. Having the rule of law, indeed respecting that constitution and the laws that flow from it. And that is exactly what we don't have.
Examples?
There are tons of examples. I mean, you know, I can use myself as one of the examples. You know, I have been arrested and detained and treated in all kinds of terrible ways, and sometimes produced in court, sometimes not produced in court, countless times, you know. Not once have I ever had to defend myself against any case. They are all patently trumped up that, you know, they cannot go to trial, including capital offenses, for which I've spent quite a bit of time in jail. You know, treason, rape, terrorism, illegal possession of guns that have, you know. So if, you know, you have the abuse, and in one of the cases, we were charged 22. We were given bail. The military stormed the courts, beat up everybody in court, and rearrested those that the courts had just released on bail. Took them to different parts of the country and charged them with murder of people that have never lived. So, so when we talk about the absence of the rule of law, that's what it means. You know, in fact, on that occasion, the entire judiciary laid down their tools, because they said, now we are
a direct violation.
This is now become too much. You may have seen at some stage when there was going to be a debate on the removal of age limit that was part of the Constitution, an important part of the Constitution. security forces entered the parliament, the House of Parliament, and beat up MPs. Some of the MPs were maimed. There is an MP called Betty Namboze who has metals holding her spinal cord, the vertebrae, broken in that attack. The Speaker of Parliament, at that time was called Rebecca Kadaga, wrote to Mr. Museveni, the president, said, I am the Speaker of Parliament. I did not invite anybody to come into Parliament. Who are these people that came into Parliament and beat up MPs?
Right.
There has never been a reply. So if you have the judiciary that can be attacked by the armed people with impunity, none of the people that attacked the judiciary ever faced any, sanctions. None of the people that attacked Parliament and injured members of Parliament has been sanctioned in any form or manner. So it means you have no Parliament. It means you have no judiciary. and so this is why you cannot talk about constitutional governance because government is built on the three arms: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive.
So then can you really talk, Dr. Besigye, then about the relevance of the people when it would appear as though the constitutional power of the people has clearly been usurped? Do they have a choice then in what they would then be able to do?
Absolutely not. That's the point. That's where I started. That if in 60 years they have never brought a leader to office, those people of Uganda, they have never removed anybody from office, how can you say they have influence and power in determining how things happen in their country?
But then someone would argue, Dr. Ari, that they have voted to retain the current president in office.
Yes, so the question is, what is the nature of those elections? Because as you know, I have been a candidate 4 times. In 2001 and 2006, I challenged the outcome. In 2006, that's when I was nominated from the maximum security prison, where I had been charged with a whole range of capital offenses. And campaigned for, I think it was less than a month, while on trial. Even the little time when I was out on bail, I was being tried for rape throughout the course of the election. But the outcome of those elections, we put them to test before the courts, the Supreme Court, in 2001 and 2006. And in all the grounds of our petition, they were proved. They were confirmed by all the judges without exception. There was a quorum of 5 judges in 2001. There was a quorum of 7 judges in 2006. All of them, without exception, confirmed the violations that we petitioned to court. And all of them conclusively said this election was not free or fair. But there is a very ridiculous provision in the Presidential Elections Act that says that even when all those findings have been made, each judge then makes a subjective assessment as to whether all that has been found affected the outcome of the election in a substantial manner. And substantial is subjective.
Sure.
And it was only on that
On that account, so
On
they
that
say that there
account.
were violations
Yes.
in the election.
And even unanimously agreed that the election was not free or fair.
But it was not to an extent of affecting the outcome.
And it even that ruling contradicted the constitution, actually, because the constitution categorically says that the people of Uganda shall have the power to choose who shall govern and how they will be governed through a free and fair election. No other means, no other election is provided for in the constitution except a free and fair one. But here were people who had already ruled unanimously that the election was not free or fair. But
Still.
of course, they were not all. I mean, to be fair to those who ruled eventually fairly, the court divided in half. In the 2001 election, there were 3-2. In the 2006 election, there were 4-3 judges separating. And even how those 3 or 4 judged to uphold the election has been written on by one of the retired judges who formed part of that quorum. And it's an interesting read, you know. Justice George Kanyeihamba has written to show how the hands of those who ruled to uphold the elections were eventually, you know, twisted to come to that, by the president to come to that ruling. So, you know, having elections and people making decisions that are reflected through those elections are totally different matters. In fact, it is for the same reason. And the person who should never make that argument is Museveni himself, because he started a war following an election. So, and in his case, he didn't even test the election in the court. He disagreed with the election and picked up guns and fought. And we agreed with him, you know, that the election was patently fraud, because, like I have said, you cannot have an election where the electoral body that has organized the election is sacked before the announcement of the results. And you still maintain the election. And this is, you know, so we have a situation in Uganda today that should worry every not just Ugandan, but every person that believes in a democratic governance should be worried.
What is a and this is the thing, the way the world conversations are shifting now, Dr. Besigye, is that and then taking on a different persona is what each sovereign entity as nations then should be able to define, describe, practice what their own democracy ought to be. Do you agree with that? Are there rules then that can be rewritten within the tenets of democracy that each country can then follow, that each nation state then can actually follow on their own?
You know,
what works for them?
You see, the tenets that constitute democratic governance are universal. You know, like freedoms. Freedoms are universal. Rights are universal. And that is the basis on which democratic governance is built, that people, first of all, are all equal before the law. They have an equal voice, and that voice should be freely expressed, and that you know, they can exercise those rights. You know, in you cannot say and I think it's okay if the people of a country said that for us we want to be governed by an absolute monarch. If for example, you know, I don't begrudge areas where you have monarchies you know, and people are comfortable that, you know, that's
how they want to be governed.
That's how they want to be governed. But you cannot call that democratic governance because the people
it's a monarchy.
it's a monarchy. So democratic governance means that we are all equal before the law and that we all have equal say on how we are governed and who governs. We have an equal say. We have one person, one vote. You know, and that, you know, the bodies, the institutions of state are independent, that they can and follow the law scrupulously, you know, and so in our situations, what happens is that, and why we have been in our case talking about transition to that democratic dispensation is that, you know, you need to look at how all these countries were formed. First of all, you know, Africa is, I think, one of the most unfortunate parts of the world where we have countries that we had no say in their formation. You know, countries were artificially formed by other people, right. And we were conscripted into them. And then we struggled to own those countries. So we started from a position of not being citizens, but of being subjects of other people, of the powers that had dominated our countries. And in the case, so we have control of power by force as the starting point of all our countries, that those with coercive power hold political power. And the transition we are looking for is for that power that is held by coercive instruments, people who have the power of forcing others to do their will, to relinquish power to the whole population to be exercised equally. That is the struggle that is at hand for all African countries. Some have progressed quite effectively towards that. Others have not.
Others are still struggling to.
Others are still way back, but we are all on that struggle. Our starting point